Daniel never imagined that the unraveling of his life would begin on a Saturday morning, one of those lazy Abuja weekends when the sun hovered like a watchful eye above the manicured lawns. The air was still. Birds chirped like it was any other day. In their tidy duplex on its street, nothing seemed out of place. Miriam hummed softly in the kitchen. The smell of boiling yam filled the air. But beneath the normalcy, something tugged at the air like a thread waiting to be pulled. The universe, it seemed, was holding its breath. And Daniel was about to tug too hard. He hadn't planned to search through her things. He was simply looking for the spare car key. That was all. A quick grab from the bedside drawer, he thought. But the key wasn't there. So he opened the wardrobe. Still nothing. Then he noticed Miriam's jewelry box on the top shelf, lacquered wood with carvings of vines. A place he never touched. But today, the lid tilted slightly, as though inviting him. He pulled it down. Pearls clinked inside. Chains tangled. He shook it once. That was when he heard it, the soft thud of something beneath. It wasn't jewelry. A dull, solid knock, like something striking wood from inside. Curious, he lifted the tray of rings and earrings and felt along the bottom. His fingers found a slight gap, barely noticeable. His heart sped up. He pressed down, and the bottom popped open with a soft click. Inside was a yellowed envelope. Old. Stained. Sealed with a cracked red wax stamp. No writing. Just a symbol, a serpent eating its tail. The Ouroboros. Daniel's breath caught. He didn't know what it meant, but it felt old. Sacred. Wrong. He turned it in his hands. Curiosity pulsed louder than caution. He broke the seal. Inside was a single black and white photograph. Grainy. Dated 1982 in a faded ink stamp on the corner. But that wasn't what made his stomach drop. It was the woman in the photo, standing stiffly in front of a modest church building. Her face. Her eyes. Her lips. Her mole by the corner of her mouth. It was Miriam. Not younger. Not different. The same. Unchanged. The same face he kissed goodnight. The same eyes he knew. But this photo was over 40 years old. Daniel sat back, coldness flooding his chest. Was it a coincidence? A relative? A trick of light? He stared for hours. He kept comparing it to her Instagram photos. The face was too exact. Same chin. Same scar at the edge of her brow she once said came from falling off a bicycle at 10. This wasn't coincidence. This was something else. The house was silent. Miriam was on a delivery run for her store. But Daniel felt washed. As though that symbol on the envelope had opened more than just a false bottom, it had cracked something wider, older, hidden. He sat in their bedroom, surrounded by furniture they'd chosen together, and felt for the first time that none of it was real. That night, he couldn't sleep. Miriam lay beside him, curled like she always did, her breath soft and rhythmic. But the sound disturbed him now. He turned to look at her. Her smooth face, free of makeup, was beautiful in the dark. But beautiful like a painting, untouched by time. No smile lines. No fatigue. For a woman of 33, she seemed ageless. But tonight, it felt eerie. As if her body was pretending to be human. His heart raced. His throat stayed dry. He lay awake, hours dragging past like shadows. And every time he blinked, he saw the photo again, dated 1982. By morning, he couldn't take it. He zoomed into the background of the photograph, zoomed into the church name above the arch, St. Ignatius Parish, Makurdi. He typed it into his laptop. A few results popped up. One mentioned a fire. Another a reconstruction. Eventually, he found an old directory with a contact number for the diocese. He called. An elderly voice answered. Weak. Crackly. Father Emeka, the man said. Daniel asked about the church. The old priest coughed. Torn down years ago, he said. I was there when it happened. Daniel hesitated, then asked, do you recognize the woman in this photo? There was silence. Long. Then, a tremor in the priest's voice. Where did you get that? Daniel didn't answer. The man continued, that woman, that's Miriam Okon. She was part of our community in the early 80s. A quiet girl. Vanished in 1983. Some said she ran. Others believed she was dead. He took a shaky breath. Why are you asking? Daniel's fingers tightened on the phone. She's my wife, he said. The line crackled like static. The priest whispered, my God. That's not possible. You're telling me she's alive. Daniel hung up. His heart thundered. His mind spiraled into dark tunnels. When Miriam returned that evening, Daniel was waiting. The photo lay on the dining table like a corpse between them. She stopped cold. Her eyes didn't widen. Her hands didn't shake. She stared at it as though it were a memory returning from the grave. Then, slowly, she sat down. Daniel expected denial. Excuses. Laughter. But none came. Instead, she exhaled. Deep. Heavy. Like she'd been holding her breath for decades. I tried to tell you, she whispered. So many times. But would you have believed me? Her voice was low, but each word felt like a blade carving the air. She looked tired. Not physically. So tired. Daniel couldn't speak. His brain tried to wrap itself around it. Who are you? He wanted to ask. But she answered before he could. I was born in 1955, she said, but I stopped aging in 1983. The world seemed to stop with her words. The air thinned. The walls seemed further away. The moment stretched like a thread pulled taut. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out another envelope. She slid it across the table. Inside were more photos. Newspaper clippings. Old driver's licenses with different names but the same face. A journal. Daniel's hands trembled as he opened it. Each photo was a time capsule. Miriam in 1991, dressed in oversized jeans and a scrunchie. Miriam in 2004, at a protest rally in Lagos. Miriam in 1979, holding a birthday cake for someone named Bola. Her handwriting changed slightly, but her face never did. The journal was filled with accounts of names she had used, cities she had fled, lovers she had mourned. And always, the same pattern, people began to notice she didn't age. So she disappeared. She buried every life. Then started again. I don't know why it happened, she wrote on one page. But I know it never stops. And it never lets me rest. Daniel read page after page. Stories of watching people she loved grow old. Stories of men who thought she was a witch. Of friends who turned on her. Of years spent alone, afraid of being exposed. He flipped through them like a man watching time collapse. Each life she lived was a ghost he never knew existed. He remembered the vacations they'd taken. The housewarming parties. The day she cried at their wedding. Were those tears joy or grief? Was he a chapter she thought she could finish? Or was she trying, just this once, to stay? The weight of all that history pressed into him. He stumbled into the bathroom and vomited. The mirror above the sink showed a face he barely recognized, his own twisted with fear. His mind reeled. She was 70. And she looked 33. Her bones had walked through 3 decades of chaos, governments, heartbreaks. And yet, she laughed at his jokes just last week. Cooked stew on Wednesday. Kissed his neck this morning. Was he a fool? A pet? A placeholder? He splashed cold water on his face and stared. He didn't want to go back into that room. He didn't want to know more. But he had to. Because what terrified him more than the truth was the silence. He returned to her. She stood by the window now, her back turned. He could see her shoulders trembling. Maybe crying. Maybe shaking. "You still love me?" she asked without turning. The question hung in the air like smoke. He didn't know how to answer. The right thing would be to leave. But he didn't move. Because in the middle of all that madness, something held him there. Something irrational. Human. Love, maybe. Or fear. Or obsession. He didn't know. All he knew was this: his life had just exploded, and he wasn't ready to walk away from the wreckage just yet. Outside, a child laughed. The sound was ordinary. Birds flew overhead. The streetlights blinked on. The world, impossibly, went on like nothing had changed. But everything had. Daniel's wife was not who he thought she was. She was older than his mother. She had seen wars and peace treaties, famines and recoveries. She had buried people and memories. And now, she was in his house. Asking for love. Asking to be seen. Not for who she pretended to be, but for the thing she truly was. And Daniel had no idea if he could do that. But he knew he had to try. In the quiet days that followed, Daniel moved through his life like a man half awake. He went to work. He shook hands. He answered emails. But it all felt paper thin, like a mask stretched over something raw beneath. At night, he would stare at Miriam across the dinner table and wonder how much history sat behind those eyes. What had she seen that she hadn't said? What wars had she survived? What lovers had she buried? The house felt the same, but he didn't. She didn't. Even silence had a new weight, dense, electric, charged with secrets too ancient to name. He tried reading the journal again. But this time, he did more than skim. He studied it like scripture. She had lived in Zaria under a different name in 1985. Hid in Calabar during the June 12th crisis. Sold second-hand shoes in Owerri under the name Kem in 1999. Once, she tried confessing to a pastor who told her she was cursed. Another time, she befriended a blind woman in Port Harcourt who believed her story, but died before telling anyone else. Page after page of borrowed names, sudden flights, rented rooms, and train stations. Miriam didn't live life. She passed through it like a shadow. She never used phones in her early years. Never kept bank accounts until the 2000s. Always paid cash. Avoided photos. Changed hairstyles often. Wore sunglasses. She described it all like muscle memory, like someone surviving a war that never ended. "Sometimes I think God made a mistake with me," she wrote on one page. "Other times, I think he forgot I'm still here." Daniel read that line 5 times. Then closed the journal. It was all too much. Too large. Too ancient. He felt like a child touching a glacier, something vast and silent and cold. Something that didn't care whether he understood it or not. He stopped sleeping in the same bed. Not because he hated her, but because he couldn't reconcile what she was with who she'd been to him. Some nights, he woke up sweating. Dreams filled with faces he didn't recognize. Faces from her past. Other nights, he heard whispers, words he couldn't place. One night, he dreamt of a little girl calling Miriam Mama before disappearing into fog. He sat up screaming. Miriam came to his door and just stood there. Watching. not saying a word. Her eyes didn't blink. Her breath didn't quicken. She looked like she'd heard that scream before. Like she'd lived through it. Many times. He followed her once. Late evening. She said she was heading to a supplier's house. But something in her voice made him suspicious. So he drove a few minutes behind her, headlights off. She didn't notice. At least, he thought she didn't. She stopped at an old cemetery just off Koru Road. Got out. Walked between the graves like she knew exactly where she was going. Then knelt at a tombstone. Daniel stayed hidden. Watched from behind a tree. She placed something on the headstone. Kissed it. Whispered. Then cried. Not the soft tears of someone grieving, but the deep, guttural sobs of someone exhausted by centuries. He approached after she left. The grave read, Chinonso di Okon, 1987 to 2015. His heart clenched. The last name, Okon. Her son. Brother. He snapped a photo of the grave and searched later that night. What he found chilled him. Chinonso had died in a car accident 10 years ago. Local paper said he left behind no surviving family. Daniel looked again at Miriam. How many deaths had she buried? How many times had she walked away from love to protect her secret? Suddenly, he saw her differently, not as a monster, but as someone sentenced to keep breaking her own heart to keep surviving. But fear returned quickly. One evening, a knock came at the door. Daniel opened it. A man stood there, tall, thin, eyes too sharp. Is Miriam here? The man asked. His accent was odd. Not foreign, but unplaceable. Daniel said no. The man stared for a moment too long, then smiled. Tell her Abel stopped by. Then he left. Just like that. Daniel locked the door twice. That name, Abel, appeared once in the journal. Briefly. If Abel ever finds me again, I'll have to run. Daniel's blood turned to ice. He turned to Miriam. She was already standing in the hallway. Frozen. Pale. How did he find me? She whispered. They argued. She said she had changed her trail. Banned the old identity. Abel should be dead, or at least retired. He had been part of a secret group once. People like her, or worse. People who didn't die. She didn't say how she knew him. Just that he was dangerous. That he believed people like them shouldn't exist quietly. That some believed they should rule. Others believed they should be purged. Miriam believed in hiding. Abel didn't. Daniel's heart beat like a war drum. He thought he'd reached the depth of the madness. But there were levels. And Abel, it seemed, came from deeper. They packed that night. Daniel didn't ask where they were going. She just said, somewhere cold. He left behind his job, his house, his normalcy. It felt like dying. But in truth, he was being reborn. As a fugitive. As a believer. As someone who now lived inside a story that could never be told. He stared at her as they crossed state borders. She looked calm. Experienced. Like she'd done this before. Of course she had. He wanted to ask how many times. But part of him didn't want to know. Some truths were better left buried, just like the name Abel should have stayed. In Jos, they found a temporary apartment. Cold. Sparse. Safe. They burned her documents. Bought new clothes. She dyed her hair. Bought a burner phone. She showed him how to vanish. How to erase his name online. How to walk like someone who doesn't want to be seen. It terrified him how good she was at it. It thrilled him too. A strange intimacy grew between them, not born of trust, but of shared secrecy. She wasn't just his wife now, She was his guide through the dark. She was fear. She was fire. And in some twisted way, he loved her more. Because now, he finally saw her. But Abel wasn't done. One morning, a newspaper headline made her hands go cold. Man found dead in Bochi Hotel with Ouroboros tattoo. Daniel didn't understand. But Miriam did. She turned pale. He's sending a message, she said. He's cleaning up. And I'm next. That night, she gave Daniel a box. Inside was another journal, thicker, older. If anything happens to me, she said, you'll know what to do. He didn't open it. Not yet. He feared what it would say. But he kept it near. Slept with it under his pillow. Because deep down, Daniel knew the truth was circling him. Just like the snake on the envelope. A week later, Abel found them. He didn't knock this time. He simply stood at the edge of the hallway. Like a shadow that had always been there. Miriam stepped in front of Daniel. You won't take him, she said. Abel smiled. You're not the only one who stopped aging, Miriam. That's when Daniel noticed his face. Abel didn't look older than 40. But his eyes were timeless. Cold. Daniel realized the truth. Miriam wasn't alone. There were others. Possibly hundreds. Maybe thousands. And not all of them wanted to hide. Some, like Abel, believed in dominance. In control. Miriam believed in disappearing. But Abel believed in war. The confrontation was silent. Miriam reached into the cabinet and pulled out a knife. Not to attack, but to cut her own palm. She whispered something Daniel didn't understand. Her blood sizzled. Abel frowned. Something shimmered. Then he vanished. Gone. As if pulled into the air. Daniel collapsed. Miriam bled. But she smiled. He won't come back for a while, she said. Daniel held her hand. Her blood was warmer than it should have been. She leaned on him. This is what I've always run from, she whispered. The others. The hunger. But now, I'm tired of running. And Daniel, though terrified, whispered, then we stay. They stayed. Not forever. But for now. In a cabin outside Jos, where the trees whispered and the cold kept most people away. She wrote again. But this time, in a new journal. One with Daniel's name inside it. She told him everything. The others. The test done on her in 1983. The scientist who tried to dissect her. The cult that believed she was divine. And somewhere between each nightmare, she laughed again. He made her laugh. Not because he understood. But because he didn't run. That, she said, was rarer than anything else she'd seen in 70 years of living. Months passed. No sign of Abel. No strange calls. No knocks. Just quiet. One morning, Daniel opened the old journal she gave him, the one she said would explain everything. Inside were pages and pages of detail. But near the end, a page caught his eye. It described a man. A banker. Found in 2025. I chose him, she wrote, because I recognized something in him. Something familiar. I think he might be one of us. But he doesn't know yet. Daniel froze. His eyes scanned the lines again. His heart slammed against his ribs. His memories are still locked. But soon, they'll wake. He dropped the journal. Hands shaking. What did she mean, one of them? He looked at his palms. At the scar from childhood. Or was it? He thought about the dreams. The whispers. The shadow memory of places he'd never visited. Was that why Abel came? Not for Miriam. But for him. He staggered outside into the snow. Cold bit into his skin. But he didn't feel it. Because the ground beneath him was no longer stable. He wasn't just married to a woman who didn't age. He might be something else entirely. And the terrifying part, he didn't want to forget.